can only sit here, but you can really do it yourself. They ask me to do their fictitious name papers. They ask me to do their incorporation papers. And I'm like, okay, for my time, that's $100 an hour.
Right.
Because it's so simple. Just, if you want to do business, you're going to have to really do business.
Yeah.
But you have to think outside of the box in terms of your revenue streams, where you're going to get the money from. We just opened up an art shop to create another revenue stream. And thank God, 5 artists, 5 different revenues. I get percentages. You bring your own equipment, it's 70-30. You use my stuff, it's 60-40, 50-50. But that's money that's coming into our nonprofit.
Right. That's great. You know, so a lot of nonprofits do all these really creative things to bring in resources. I'd say the only caution is you make sure that all the extra things you're doing are actually profitable. Because I think we've seen a lot of nonprofits say, we're going to sell this and do this, and we're going to bring in extra money, and it ends up just draining time and resources from the nonprofit. So you do. I think I actually drew a little quick matrix here. It's called the dual bottom line matrix, and I'm a great artist, so it's once again 2 axes, right? Because consultants love kind of 2 axes with graphs. So sorry, it's hard to see. So basically, the one is mission, and the other one is finance, right? So you can figure out where your programs are gonna, or where your activities fit on this. You can kind of get an idea. So the question mark programs are low mission alignment and low financial impact. The hard things are like the programs you really want to run, but they don't generate much profits on their own, so they need to support them from other areas. There's star programs, which they both bring in money and they're aligned with your mission. And there's also kind of dollar makers, which they're not directly tied with your mission, but they generate money, right? So you can kind of think you don't necessarily need everything to be high on mission. Some of it can be a little lower, but you want to make sure that it's you can try and link it to your mission. That helps. And then the other danger is sometimes if you have this other stuff, if you do too much of it, your organization becomes known for something that isn't actually your mission, right? So I think your ideas are great. So I just think that you have to be very smart about how you do it. But definitely, when you're starting up, you want to think about all different possibilities.
Outside the box.
Right, we have to.
Yeah.
I actually wrote a curriculum for my sister for nonprofit. It's thinking outside of the box. You can't. It's not the norm anymore.
And I was saying earlier, I mean, a lot of times. Just to move on. A lot of nonprofits, when they start off, people say it depends on sweat equity. So basically, people sweat volunteer labor and you spending all this extra time doing contract consultant work to bring in the funds. So a lot of times, when you start up, you hope that there's going to be miracle grants and stuff, but a lot of times it's just hard work.
Hurricane Katrina hit the year we did ours, and
well, it sounds like there's also a lot of expertise within this room, so make sure throughout this program that you talk to one another too to hear about how some of the other ones started up. But I just want to move us along because I have 25 minutes left. So communicating the budget, this is pretty straightforward, but it's basically saying that when you're done your budget, you want to make sure it looks good for the people that you're showing it to. So the first piece is showing an appropriate level of detail. So actually, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but Stephanie was showing me her budget. And I actually thought it had it's kind of a great amount of detail for sharing with just maybe a potential donor. It may not be enough detail for a funding source, like a foundation or a government, but I thought it just, it's very easy to read and understand. Can I pass this around? I'm just going to pass it around. I've seen budgets that have been like 15 columns wide, 5 pages long, and sometimes if you're a large organization, you want that much detail, but you're not going to show that to your board because their eyes are going to glaze over. You want to be able to, no one's going to pay attention to anything. So you want to make sure it's the appropriate level of detail. State assumptions clearly. So I know someone back there was talking about making sure they have backup assumptions shown. So there are different ways to do that. Sometimes it's just showing what are all the different assumptions. I'm assuming that I'm going to sell 100,000 bottles of water at $4 each. It's expensive, I don't think about it. But
I like that guy.
$100,000, $4, right. I guess if they're large bottles of water. So, kind of backing up where your numbers are coming from. A lot of times it actually helps to put in extra narrative into your budgets to kind of explain or highlight different things. And then also just remember that different funding sources might require different formats. So whatever you enter in your QuickBooks, you may need to pull it out and rejigger it depending on what you're doing. So I just have a sample budget here. And this is just one possible presentation that maybe you would give to the board. So it has some comments basically, and I think that's in the exhibits if you're, because the text is kind of small. So it just says, you know, the foundation, 2 startup grants from local foundations, special collection from individuals, and then, you know, salaries explains, I think this was for doing like meals for the homeless type thing, so church administrator time, so making sure they pay for that, a coordinator for volunteers, 30,000, and then it kind of covers all the other different pieces they have. And this is a fake budget, so I mean, don't try and figure out who those foundations are, because I don't know who they are. But kind of a little bit, food has a note saying it's 10% higher than last year. So just kind of highlighting some details, so when people see this, they don't just see a page of numbers. They see the story behind it and what's going into it. Any questions or comments? Okay. So I wanted to talk about one other important planning document, and I made a slide for it, and then somehow I deleted it. So unfortunately, I don't have a slide for it, but I want to talk about cash flow projections, which are, especially for a small startup organization, can be really, really helpful, but even large organizations should be thinking about doing it. There are actually templates and instructions for cash flow projections on this website. It's Nonprofit Assistance Fund. It's not the same organization as Nonprofit Finance Fund. It's different. On the last page of your packet, there's actually the web addresses listed, but I just wanted to highlight. They actually have a lot of scenario budgets, cash flow templates on their website that you can actually just download and start using. They're a little on the complicated side as far as complexity, so if you're very small, you may not want to use them, but sometimes it's a nice starting point. So that's just a research. I'm actually going to be showing you one of these on screen. But the basic idea of a cash flow projection is, say you do get one of these miracle startup grants, right, for say $100,000. But this miracle startup grant is not going to give you the money until December, right? So that's when the cash is going to come. But you want to run your program for the entire year. So that you're going to have cash leaving the. So if you did a full year budget, right, you'd probably have break even, or you might have a small surplus. But if you did your cash flow projection, you're in big trouble, right? Because you have to somehow figure out how to pay, 11 months of expenses before you get the grant. So that's the idea of a cash flow projection, is it lets you go month by month figuring out when cash is going to come in and when cash is going to leave the door. And that's a very extreme example, right? Because honestly, if you're in that case of a foundation was really willing to give you $100,000 to start up, maybe you could ask them to see if they could give you the money earlier. But a lot of times there's a mismatch between when cash comes in and when it goes out. So your budget might show a surplus for the year, and things might look financially healthy. But you could be running the organization in the middle of the year and have no money because the timing is mismatched. So just to give you, I'm going to kind of show you very quickly what a cash flow projection sheet looks like. So this is the one from Nonprofit Assistance Fund. And you can see this is a blank template, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm like blocking the screen. So basic idea, you have month. Oh shoot, let's see, it's hard to see, I didn't realize that. Sorry about that. So I guess it's hard to see, but right here, you can put the month up here, and then there's a beginning of the month cash on hand. This is a blank template, so it's 0, but basically you put down how much cash you have at the beginning of each month. And then there's an area called cash from support, so all your donations, and then there's cash from revenue, right? So you would go through all your revenue sources for the year and think when they're going to come in. So you might get a lot of donations if you do a fundraiser at a certain point in the time of year. So you put all those donations in that month, right? Or you may know when your grants are going to actually arrive as checks. And then same for the fee for service. You kind of have an idea of when you're going to get all that tuition for the classes, and so on and so forth. And then down below, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm not going to try and break it.
Move the whole card.
Yeah.
Is there?
It's when you
Oh,
go
you-
from the PowerPoint to this, it's a
I'm
completely different
sorry.
size screen.
I'm
So
sorry.
no,
I should have
when you
warned
move
you.
from one to the other, it's all right. When you go back, I
Should
can
have
put it
warned you
back.
that I was doing this. So then down below you have, so here you got total receipts, so that's the total cash, and you'll see it month by month. And then down below it's disbursements, so where you're writing out checks. So here you have payroll, there's staffing, so all the different possible categories. And generally speaking, expenses tend to be more even, right? It's more or less if you're running things year round, you're kind of almost dividing by 12 for a lot of things. But depending maybe if you do a school or if you do a summer camp, certain times of the year expenses are going to be higher. And then there's also room for kind of mortgage payments and loan payments. And then you're going to get a final net cash for the period. Did cash for the month go up or did it go down? And then you'll get an ending cash balance.
Now that
Yes.
form name right there, did I miss something that is not in the package or?
It's not in there. I was telling that I accidentally deleted the slide that had it on it.
Okay,
But this sheet is available on nonprofit assistance fund.
okay,
It's available online and you can download it. I didn't create it. But I wrote the address there. It's also in the back of your packet. There's an address for it. So, but it doesn't have to be this complicated. Sometimes, you make it more simpler. But it's really, really, really helpful. A lot of organizations do this and they figure out, like say in the summer months, that cash is low. So when it comes summer, two things can happen. First of all, sometimes nonprofits end up having to apply for a line of credit. And the cash flow projections helps them prove that, look, I'm going to have to borrow money at this point in time, but I can demonstrate that later on the government contract's going to come in, or for the past couple of years, this is how much my annual appeal has generated, so you can get a line of credit, so you can borrow money to bridge that gap. Or sometimes organizations will move things around. So if they realize in October that they're going to have a dip in cash, but they usually do their annual appeal in December, they might move ahead to annual appeal, try and do it at an earlier point in time to bring in cash earlier. And it's also just helpful so that when you're looking at your bank account in the summer when cash is low, that you don't go into complete panic, that you have some idea that I know that this cash is going to come in, this is just a tough couple of months that I'm just going to have to get through. And I know a couple of daycare centers that are like that. They know in the summer that money is just critically low, and they try and they try to not buy supplies during that period of time and try to really cut down on cash expenses then. But they also know that once September comes around, money flows again. So some of it is just so you know what's going on. And it's also helpful as you're doing this, as each month goes by, you can actually enter your actual cash figures and cash expenditures and kind of revise things if you need to. But I think it's a really, really helpful document for planning, especially if you're starting up and you're trying to figure out how am I going to even make it this year? Like, what is it going to look like? Or even if you're established. Many established organizations will still do cash flow projections, just because the timing may not work out. There are questions or comments? Back to my presentation. All right. Oh, did I need to? Okay. Thank you.
I just want everybody to be able to see.
Okay. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about accounting and bookkeeping. I'm actually going to be the first to say that I'm actually not an expert on these subjects, so I'm going to talk about it very generally, but I actually have 3 resources that you can go to get more assistance, or if you work with an accountant, that's a good place to start. But I can kind of talk about it generally. So if you're just getting started, when you're getting off the ground, you probably want a bank account for the nonprofit, just so you can track your financial activity, to kind of write checks and deposit money. And then you're going to want to set up accounting software. So a lot of people start off with QuickBooks. FundEasy is also a pretty good software for
My bookkeeper.
My bookkeeper. I think FundEasy has been pretty popular with nonprofits. QuickBooks is what most people use, but I'm actually not a huge fan of it.
Why?
The way it deals with restrictions is very difficult. But I would say, I think 50 to 60% of small nonprofits use QuickBooks.
What's the other one you mentioned?
FundEasy. Yeah.
And who was the other one?
It's in my bookkeeper, which I'm not familiar with.
My bookkeeper. My bookkeeper.
Is there a way around it on QuickBooks?
Excel?
For-
2010?
I actually don't know. I don't know. I just think that the way QuickBooks does restrictions is a little messy. It still does it okay. I'll still track it and stuff, but it's not like the tidiest way of doing it.
What, is Peachtree, is that still out there?
Yes, it's still out there. I think from my understanding, it's usually larger organizations that start using, or medium-sized that start using Peachtree. I don't know too many super small ones that use it. It's really pretty much QuickBooks. Most people use QuickBooks. Yeah. Peachtree is good if you're like, if you're big and you need a lot of complicated funds and government contracts to start using. So the main point is, as you get larger, you may need to upgrade your accounting systems to make sure it keeps track. But I know I said something negative about QuickBooks, but when you're starting out, QuickBooks is fine. So if you're with a church and you're not necessarily separating out as a 501c3, you may want to ask the church if they can put a separate program or class to track your program activity, so it's kept distinct. And then if you're starting your own 501c3, you really want your own organization's financials. So it's really helpful when you start off that if you can consult with a knowledgeable bookkeeper to set up things. You're going to start off with setting up what's called a chart of accounts. And that's basically all the big categories. All your revenue categories, all your expense categories, all your asset categories, all your liability categories. It's often helpful to actually have someone good to set that up. Because if it's not set up properly, it can cause a lot of pain later on. Something to keep in mind, QuickBooks has this great feature called classes, which lets you kind of take your revenue and expenses and classify them by different programs, basically. So that's a feature that a lot of people don't use, but is actually really helpful. So just keep that in mind. You know, you really do need to like consult with someone to set things up, or talk to someone who's done it before, who knows what they're doing. And then for regular bookkeeping, you just want to make sure someone's adequately trained and can use the software. There's also a lot of part-time contractors available, so people who will come. You don't need a full-time bookkeeper. You just need someone to do 3 hours a week. That's one option. And then once again, as you become larger, you're going to have to start upgrading. I think a lot of nonprofits actually use QuickBooks far too long. And they get to a point where they shouldn't be using it anymore. They need to be on Peachtree or Fundeasy or something else, and they don't switch over.
What type of budget dollar amount would you suggest?
QuickBooks, it depends on how complicated the financials are. But I would say when you're getting to like 500,000 to $1 million, you want to start thinking about getting something more complicated. Unless you just have a very simple financial structure. Okay. It's also really important when you get started to start setting up accounting policies, financial policies and procedures. So that's basically guidelines for how you handle money and how you record money. It's really, really important. And I think a lot of times people overlook this. So I think the biggest area that you're going to want to set up some policies for and procedures is around internal controls. And basically that's for fraud prevention. It's really, really sad, but there have all been studies done about frauds in nonprofits, and it's most commonly done by someone you trust, someone that you like, and someone that you've known for a long time.
I've really never heard as many cases in the news of people mishandling nonprofit funds as much as I've heard recently.
And it's easy because you're working with people you like, you trust them, you think, oh, no one's going to take money. But unfortunately, we're sinful, and so you want to put in controls in place that are going to keep people from even having the temptation. So some of the common things is making sure 2 people handle cash. So even having 2 people handling cash and writing receipts. Sometimes checks over a certain amount being signed by 2 people. Having the
Can you have those put in your bylaws?
I think usually they're not put in your bylaws, but usually the board will write policies and procedures down.
I guess that's what
But the more important thing is making sure they're followed through, because you can have a great manual, but if nobody follows it, it's not good. And it can be tough if you're starting up, because you're a small organization and there are not that many people people involved. So you may not, but as much as possible, try to have 2 people check things at all times.
And having your staff bonded,
Bonded.
Bonded.
Okay.
yeah.
I'm not familiar
It's
with
like
that.
insurance to protect against fraud.
Okay, okay. So just some common examples of fraud. Skimming cash is the most obvious. So someone might collect cash and write the receipt to the donor, but then skim a little bit and then say that the actual donation for the church was less than what they gave, right? Inappropriate credit card use. So people using the credit card for personal expenses, and if nobody really checks the credit card statement closely, they just get away with it. And then another common thing is fake vendors. So people will create other entities, right? And then bill the nonprofit, for some paper company that doesn't exist. And then if the person who kind of writes the vendor checks is the same person who does the accounting system, it can just slip under the radar. Yeah.
That's what happened to who?
Was a big scam recently about that, one of the
It was
universities.
just,
Really?
recently, this woman set up a trash removal, set up a company for trash removal, and the company was non-existent.
There's another one bigger than that, was a university where the guy set up vendors for food, and he oversaw food.
No, it was LaSalle.
It was, yeah,
LaSalle.
LaSalle.
I thought it was.
One of those was large, it was
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of dollars, it was no small.
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
Just be under the dark.
Yeah. And it's also, you think, but sometimes, people, especially, it's really common for people internal too, because they know the systems, they know how to get around them.
We often hear about bank robberies, and everybody says, the bank robber is the guy who goes in, sticks them up, and runs out the door. That's just for media consumption. The real bank robbers are the vice presidents and higher, who know the internal systems, and they walk away with millions, and they typically don't get indicted. And the reason they don't get indicted is because the banks don't want you to know how much money they're losing internally.
And it's also really important to know that most of the time, fraud is not detected by the auditor. So don't think that just because you have an auditor coming in to check things, I think 95% of fraud is detected internally. People paying attention to the financial statements and realizing that something isn't right.
Well, how do you guard against some of these things? Because there are going to be some vending situations where there literally are not 2 people there. There literally won't be 2 people there to receive cash. How could you?
Hire subcontractor.
Well, some people have the cash register to mark to kind of keep track of things, right? To make sure that what's in the cash. In some cases, it's hard. You can't. If you can, try to put it in place. Or you may want to make sure that's not always the same person. So it's rotating. So if someone is skimming a little, then at least it's not
Every day.
every single day.
I know, for instance, in a private school setting, what we decided to do was have contract out our receipts, our cash tuition receipts, so we didn't receive them on campus for a lot of reasons, safety, etc. And that all the parents would just send a voucher to that company, and the company would put our money in some holding place.
Okay.
So that just bypassed a lot of cash handling, safety issues.
Okay.
So a lot of places you can do it that way too, get large cash, just
A lot
bypass
box at the
that.
bank.
Yeah.
Right.
But really,
A lot box account.
That's
And switching people,
right.
there was a church that I know personally. They had one person collecting the Sunday school receipts. People started suspecting, they changed, all of a sudden the Sunday school receipts like nearly tripled.
Sunday school receipts. You got to be kidding me. Sunday school receipts.
That's where a lot of the big stuff comes from. Inside the church.
I know this personally. Sunday school receipts nearly tripled. I know it more than doubled. And
they need to attend Sunday school.
they probably were.
and I think, vast majority of the time, people are trustworthy, but you want to make sure that there are procedures to follow just to make sure it doesn't happen, right? It doesn't hurt. And then it's a